All right, we in?
Rolling.
Cool. Okay, well, hopefully I don't get another. Looks a lot more stable this time.
Yeah, you look
So,
good now.
excellent.
Same.
Um, awesome. Well, guys, this has been crazy. We've had a wild start trying to get this going here due to technical difficulties, but we're here. I'm joined today with Dalton Cole, my co-founder and partner at DigOp, and Marc Krisjanous from SixBlocks Audit. And I am Philip Moran with DigOp as well. Marc, thank you for joining us today.
No problem.
How'd you like my radio voice intro there? Was that
Beautiful.
I thought it was good.
yeah?
Very
Excellent.
charismatic. Yes.
Now I was practicing that for a few hours before we came in here, so I'm glad. But Marc, you're like the cryptography man, as far as I'm concerned. The keeper of the peace in the world of custody. I don't want to. You do a lot in this industry, so I want you to give your own intro and what you're up to, so people have that context.
No problem. Yeah, so I got into this. I got into the Web3 space around about 2022. I got interested in it, but previous to that and ongoing is I'm actually a PCI DSS assessor, and that's an information security standard that the credit cards created to try and stop the bleed of credit card hacks. So I've been in that space for about over 8 years now. And so I got interested in crypto side around about 2022. And I was just amazed when I got in here, the amount of hacks and rug pulls and scams and just basically the wild west of crypto. And coming from a background where you're auditing or assessing entities that are like banks that have got proper security for the last 30 years, it was quite daunting to actually be presented with this. So I found a security standard called the Cryptocurrency Security Standard, CCSS, and I approached them and said, I'm interested in becoming an auditor for the standard because I want to start trying to clean up this environment because it's just horrendous. And they said, well, they don't have an auditing program because C4 is basically a non-profit, so they rely on volunteers. And so I basically helped them establish the auditing program for CCSS. And right now, we've got around about 20 auditors around the world for CCSS, which is really good. And I provide gap assessments and auditing services around CCSS, but we also basically do gap assessments using different security standards and frameworks. So it's not just a CCSS because that's really just a key management standard. And when you're looking at security for a Web3 platform, there's just more than just key management, right? The other things I do is I help write standards around the world. So I currently, ISO, you may know that from ISO 27001. So ISO's got a technical committee called TC307, and they're writing maybe about 20 standards for blockchain and DLT systems. So I participate in that. I also participate in writing standards for the Singapore Security Council, Singapore Standards Council, sorry, too many acronyms and so forth. And so I'm helping them writing a baseline security standard. And also I'm on the working group for writing regular model law for stablecoins. So that's all the Commonwealth countries can use this model law to support stablecoins within their jurisdiction or their country. So I basically help out a lot around about standards writing because I find it quite interesting.
Mm-hmm. So I've got a little bit of a background in fintech. I used to build out sort of like core banking adapters for different solutions so that startups in the area can connect to some of these core banking solutions. I've got a little bit of knowledge on PCI DSS. Were you able to pull any of your, knowledge and strategies from that sort of assessment protocol into the CCSSA work, as far as obviously data security controls and things like that is a little tougher on a public blockchain, and private data and all that kind of stuff, or network monitoring doesn't really apply. But what would be some of the things that you might have been able to draw from when establishing these audit paths?
Oh, excellent question. Basically, the CCSS audit methodology is based on PCI DSS for a start. So it's very rigorous. You basically have to do interviews, observations, inspections, and reviews. And PCI DSS has an extremely strong key management piece, because you've got to protect the credit card information while it's at rest and in transit. So what we did is a lot of the ideas in CCSS came from the people that started the standard around about 2015, but in version 9 we enhanced it, and a lot of some of the PCI DSS ideas actually came over. And PCI DSS as a standard is really good. I mean, It covers everything from network security, device security hardening, right up to governance, right? Risk management, service provider management, and so forth. So it's such a good standard. And we did bring over service provider management in CCSS version 9, which is the current standard, risk management, and also a lot more in terms of training as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's such a good thing to draw from, because when you think about credit card networks compared to blockchains and the amount of users or people that have credit cards and the amount of value that's transmitted on credit cards, it just dwarfs anything we have right now in crypto. I don't know what the amount of credit card transactions is compared to it, but it's got to be orders of magnitude, multiple orders of magnitude. I would assume different. So it just, I don't know. When I was hearing your story, I was thinking that it's just such a great precedent, I guess, to draw from for establishing these sorts of protocols.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, blockchain's based on cryptography. So at the end of the day, whatever was in PCI and other standards like ISO 27001, it's just fundamental cryptography and key management. So it's easy just to pass that over to the blockchain world. And that's why we found it, coming from a PCI DSS background, we found it extremely easy just to come over to the Web3 space, learn about the architecture and the fundamentals and so forth. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you're protecting keys using cryptography. And for us, it's, no problem there whatsoever.
What would you say doesn't translate well from the PCI DSS world?
Oh, anything that basically fundamentally relies on, physical security controls is probably one that you'd have to wedge in a little bit differently. Some of the governance protocols and access control to a certain level. But ultimately, if you look at a centralized exchange, you've got access controls, you've got patch management, you've got configuration management, SecOps, the whole lot, right? So literally you could, for a centralized exchange, you could take PCI DSS and just transfer it over and apply it to an exchange, no problem.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, we were even talking to, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying the challenge currently is decentralized and trying to apply some of the controls to a decentralized system. The way you would probably look at auditing that or assessing that is finding out someone who's actually accountable for the entire ecosystem. And from there, you would probably be able to audit or assess that if there was some type of entity that had accountability. Yeah,
we were actually having a conversation, I believe it was our last one, where we were talking about SOC 2 compliance and how, with SOC 2, before the big remote work boom, access controls and human access controls of systems was such a big part of it. And now that you have so many remote workers, a lot of these SOC 2 auditors are just like, oh, no, all your people work from home. You don't have to worry about it. But that's actually not the case. Like as far as I'm concerned, you should know, their network should be locked down. Like all of these systems should be super secure, but it's kind of just waved off because, we're in a new environment. Like access controls aren't. It's not that they're not an issue. They're harder to, I guess, gauge. So they're just stepping past it. So it's a similar thing. If it's not just like distributed systems, but it's distributed teams are also causing some of these issues for transitioning, and that doesn't just apply to crypto. That applies to every company now. It's got a kind of a remote first workforce when it comes to kind of those human access controls.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you brought up SOC 2. So I see in my world there's two types of assurance. There's the assertion type, which is SOC 2, so forth.
Right.
And then there's the pretty much the in-depth fundamental assessment and auditing, which is like ISO 27001,
right.
CCSS. And with SOC, basically, I take SOC, I understand where it's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
The things about like the service descriptions where basically the entity says this is what we do, mm-hmm. and then the SOC auditor basically works out testing procedures around what they state they do.
Right.
It provides a certain level of assurance, but for me personally, when you go down into the weeds and you actually have the auditor, which dictates what the environment, what the scope of the audit will be in terms of, they say this is not in scope, but then you go, well, applying this standard actually is in scope, right? Because
right.
it can impact the security of things.
Right.
That's where I see some quite good benefits in terms of ISO 27001, CCSS, PCI DSS, because the auditor's got more control in terms of scoping and actually how deep they can go. It's an interesting thing. I see a few more assertion-based frameworks and standards coming out in the Web3 space, so it's going to be interesting to see how that world develops.
Will be.
Yeah, I mean, I think when Bybit got hacked recently, I think like I was doing a little digging, and I believe that they actually held ISO 27001 and I think and SOC 2 as well. Do you think that there's things that like those criteria just kind of like not really prepared to address? Like you just kind of went through how you can actually apply those pretty nicely to crypto or some of these like an exchange. But is the problem maybe that like the auditors conducting those just kind of aren't familiar with these crypto systems and like the risks that they're exposed to? I don't know if you have any thoughts there.
Yeah, I see a gap currently in the Web3 space. So you've got really good smart contract auditors, pen testers and so forth, right? The ones that really, really get into the weeds. And then you've got the higher up auditors, such as myself, that apply information security standards or cybersecurity frameworks overall. And those audit reports from reviewing smart contract code and so forth, those reports feed into what I'm auditing, right? So as an overall audit of the ecosystem. And it's really, I don't think there's enough skill from some of the more established auditors that come from the legacy space or the Web 2 space, who come over here and actually fully understand how this whole thing works and fits together, especially around decentralized, right? Mm-hmm. But the other thing too, and there's a lot more talk or debate coming up, is in terms of how much assurance does a certification actually provide you for the stakeholders? Because most of these, including CCSS, it's a point-in-time audit. And as we've seen loads and loads of times, right, is that someone does a smart contract audit, and the audit report is for version 1 of the smart contract code. And then they deploy that, and everyone's happy because the audit report says they got a green tick. But then literally, and in some cases, within a month or even sooner, the code base is slightly tweaked, or what they call slightly tweaked. And they go, no, we don't need an audit for this. We just incorporate another library, it's all good. Mm-hmm. And so they upload that version, say version 1.1, but they don't do an audit. And then what they've done, mistakenly, is they've introduced a huge vulnerability. But all the stakeholders think, well, this is really cool. We look at the audit report, still got a green pass, but it's for version 1. But currently version 1.1's up there with a huge hole. So the level of assurance that these types of certifications provide really needs to be taken with a grain of salt, because at the same time, the fast-moving pace and the way things are organized within this environment, like you upload a smart contract, it's immutable, it's permanent, unless you've got the ability to have a proxy where you can actually replace the fundamental workings of the smart contract, right, and you don't interfere with the interface that the stakeholders are using. I think there's coming to a stage now where we have to look at some things like ISO 27001, where you have continuous improvement, and like Delta audits and so forth, where stakeholders can gain assurance that there's ongoing activities in terms of compliance. So you've got, large enterprise organizations and so forth, they have continuous, reviews, internal audits, internal assessments, reviews and so forth, and processes. I think that needs to be brought out more, teased out more somehow. For example, with this Infini, I think it's the Infini hack, where a developer was released, let go, and there was a kind of like a backdoor to a smart contract that was never really documented, and this developer still had rights to access the smart contract. You can go for a SOC 2 audit, or you can go for an ISO 27001 audit, CCSS and so forth, and on that day it was good.
Right.
The offboarding process was great, and then maybe 6 months down the track, people too busy, they don't do the offboarding process. It gets forgotten in some cases, or postponed. If you implemented some type of quarterly review process where every 3 months you actually check to see who has access to these, the smart contracts or whatever, and you can pick up that actually the process has been laxing somewhat. That's the type of thing that really is beneficial assurance. How you expose that to the stakeholders is the question there, in regards to, well, maybe you release quarterly report reviews to the stakeholders to say, right, we've every 3 months we do these reviews, and here's the reviews and here's the outputs, publicly accessible, or to the stakeholders. Might be some idea of this, of how you can actually improve it.
Yeah, the shortcomings of just these point-in-time assessments is something that Phil and I talk about regularly when we're doing due diligence on organizations. Even if we're just looking at something like identity management for like a cloud infrastructure and roles and things like that, they may have it perfectly set. I mean, they know we're coming to look. They could have it all tidied up and clean for us. We look at it, okay, looks great, and then next day, everybody's got access to the same keys, all sorts of stuff, and we have no idea. And even quarterly, like a quarter is a long time in this space.
Yeah.
Like a lot can happen in a week. A lot can happen the next day afterwards, especially if you've just rushed to clean everything up for an auditor. Who knows how much you've moved around, and it's interesting, and there's not an easy solution around it. We've talked about actually some solutions for us where it's more like real time monitoring and things, and then but that's a huge step up for
if you do that, you become a service provider that could impact the security of the environment.
Yeah, right. Then we're another attack surface, right?
That's exactly right. And yeah, it's the point in time is a question to really look at. Quarterly reviews, absolutely, but as you mentioned, that might be too long. But I suppose the thing you've got to think about when you do these reviews is the impact of an audit or an assessment on the entity. Like how much impact it is. I mean, for PCI DSS, even CCSS, the impact's huge,
right?
Because it's so rigorous. So, a startup, do they have time to do these types of reviews every week? Have they got the tooling? Can they afford the tooling? So there's a balance that needs to be addressed. What we do at SixBlocks Audit is we provide counterparty risk assessments and so forth. So we may have a stakeholder such as insurance that's interested in looking at the security posture of this entity, and one of the core things we do is when we go in there, we look for some type of ongoing monitoring and continuous improvement, which comes out of ISO 27001. It's good for this as well. So we not only look at where they are right now, but in terms of how they're actually ensuring that they remain compliant and secure ongoing. So we'll ask for like, do you have quarterly review processes or some type of continuous monitoring and improvement.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Before we get any further, before we start this call, you were telling us a little bit about your first experiences in DeFi and how it got you to dig more into this. Could you share that story? Would you feel comfortable talking about your experience with like liquidity pools early on?
Yeah, no problem. So I got interested in around about 2022 into crypto, and so I thought, wow, this is really cool. And so I thought, well, I'll get into a liquidity pool and I'll put some money into it. And I'm based in New Zealand, so it was ticking along nicely. You know, it was like 300%, interest and so forth. I thought, wow, this is just amazing. And I woke up the next one day and I found out that all my funds had disappeared. Like the liquidity pool, the balance and so forth, were all gone to zero. And I found out that some anonymous person on crypto Twitter mentioned something about one of the coins that was in this pool, and everyone did a bank run. And I was going, wow, this is really exciting. Coming from somewhere like an established, like the legacy space, right, where you buy shares or you buy gold or whatever, right, and you don't have this thing all suddenly overnight it drops to zero. And I thought, okay, well, this is quite interesting. So I looked around and then I was like, wow, these rug pools and these platforms that just start up in the middle of nowhere. And the only way you can talk to the platform owners is via Discord with anonymous accounts. And people were pouring millions and millions of their hard-earned money into these platforms. And then all suddenly it gets rug pulled or they get hacked. And like all the money's gone, they've been hacked. There was no secure coding techniques. There was nothing around security. And then they try and get hold of the platform owners, of course, hiding behind anonymous accounts. And they go, oh, yeah, we got hacked. Sorry about that. Yeah, we'll just shut everything down. And then they grab the same code base and they move over and they start up again. And then all of a sudden the millions pour in again. And I thought, wow, this is not the Wild West. This is the Wild, Wild West. And I was looking for ways of, well, how can you protect people that want to be part of this,
right,
and not come into a Discord channel and say, hey, I need help. And then literally a second later, there's 10 administrators who want to give you a hand, but can you give me a seed phrase to help you? And it's just incredible. And so I looked around and I was thinking, well, there's got to be some type of standard, a security standard that tries to rein in these platforms. And that's when I found the Cryptocurrency Security Standard, CCSS. And so I approached them and, they said that there was an auditing function for this. And so I contacted them and said, hey, I want to be an auditor because I really think this place needs to be cleaned up pretty fast.
Right.
Wait until the regulators come here. You don't know what pain is until you start seeing some regulation coming through. And so I helped C4 because they're a non-profit. They rely on volunteers. And so I helped them build up their auditing program. And I based it on PCI DSS because I thought that this needs to be really rigorous. You can't just have, fit for purpose or any type of situation where the entity or the platform decides what's going to be what's considered in place or not. And so I became the first CCSSA, so the CCSS auditor, and Fireblocks had always wanted to become CCSS certified because they really believed in the standard, even from the get-go. And they were gunning to get certified, to go undergo an assessment to see what was going on. And so once I became the auditor, Fireblocks said, right, let's go, let's do this. And so I audited Fireblocks, and they became the first CCSS systems in the world. And it was really good because they became kind of like the ultimate benchmark, really, Fireblocks. And so from then on, we just started bringing in more auditors, educating them, and getting getting some momentum going. So really, CCSS has gained quite a significant momentum. Mm-hmm. Interest in the market. So there's a lot of stakeholders that are considering CCSS as part of their assurance framework. For example, if a platform wants to gain insurance, we help the insurance companies understand well what does CCSS provide in terms of assurance for you, like for your risk profiling and so forth. And it definitely is getting more momentum and more interest.
Right. Yeah, I think that's just such a cool anecdote and story of waking up to a big pile of impermanent loss, and that's what brought Sheriff Mark into town to clean things up, as you said.
Yeah. It's just, I was just freaked out, basically. It's just, oh,
Right.
wow, this is just incredible. Because the thing is this is all about finance right now. Yeah,
Right.
it's like, this is not about gaming and so forth or something
Right.
like that. It's like these people are pouring millions and millions
Right.
of their hard-earned cash into these platforms that didn't exist the day before. You
Right.
can't, there's no accountability. You can't contact anyone. I mean, obviously things are changing now, but when I got into it, it was just unbelievable.
Right.
And
Right.
so it's like, and then the crypto community keeps saying, oh, this is the future. The public's going to come over here and they're going to love it. Well, the public came over here with some money. They went to Discord. They asked for some help, and they got a scammer straight away.
Right.
And they gave the seed phrase because they have no understanding what a seed phrase is, right? So they give her
Right.
over the seed phrase, and a couple of seconds later, their wallet's empty, and they're going, "Wow, this is great. Off we go, back
Yep.
to legacy space." And it's just that fundamental nature where, just the general public comes over to the crypto space. They want to be a part of it, but there's no education, and they think, well, this is going to be regulated just like it is back in the share market world, and all the other basic investments is regulated, it's protected by government. Hey, if I lose my seed phrase, which looks kind of like a password, I can
Right.
contact someone and they'll reset my seed phrase, and it's all good. And they don't realize that, well, actually, if you lose your seed phrase, it's game over. So there's a needs to be, and don't even start with the user experience stuff where, like things like Bybit, with the hack there, unofficially there's talk that, they were using clear signing, but at the same time they really didn't understand completely what they were signing.
Right.
Because even though the devices provided clear signing, I think it was the CEO admitted that they didn't see everything. And, even the likes of Bybit, where the key custodians you would expect are highly trained and highly qualified to do what they're doing, they trip up on these types of situations, and then you've got the general public going and they're thinking a seed phrase is like a bank account password.
Right.
Yeah, and I think like such a big challenge when it comes to like what you just mentioned, like these people who can access that key material, you'd expect them to be super highly trained. But I think what's really unique about crypto, relative to even, like you came from credit card, like the payments, legacy payments, is that now it's like we have like this, like sophisticated trading operation, sitting on top of managing a private, it's like there's a private key that you have to like constantly access to manage that trading operation. Whereas before it's like this has all been like, you open a brokerage account at Interactive Brokers, or if you're a big boy, you go to Goldman Sachs and you open up a broker. You know what I mean? And now it's like that key material, like technically has to be accessible to be nimble, right? And that's I like, at least I think that's fairly unique for our asset class. But I told you this privately, Mark, but I'll say it here is that when it's funny when I came across the CCSS standards, I was so excited because I was like, oh, you mean there's like people actually thinking about this? Like it was I was like looking around, who is anybody dealing with these problems? And so it got me, very excited when I learned there's like serious people dealing with this. And so, I was like, oh, I got to get involved with these guys. This is great stuff. And I think that what has been interesting to see is that, it's great to see like the momentum building with, more entities desiring to obtain the CCSS. But I'm sure you agree with me. There's still a lot of work to be done to like get more people to feel the burning urge to do it. You know what I mean? Because we still see a lot of folks who are like, well, like names shall not be named, but it's like you'll have a conversation with somebody and they'll be like, oh, well, everybody's got to come to us anyway, so why do we need to, you know, think about something like this? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the really cool thing about CCSS is it's a community-driven standard. For example, things like PCI DSS and some of the other new standards or the new bodies, certification bodies that are coming out, it's kind of like a paid membership to participate in the standard. For example, like with PCI DSS, there's certain committees that you can join to help shape or influence the standard, but you pay a reasonable amount of money to actually join these working groups and these committees, and that really restricts the skill and the opportunity and the passion that comes from people saying, hey, this really needs to be fixed. But they have like a public consultation, or the assessors can consult and so forth, but really at the end of the day, their comments, how much impact are they going to have unless they pay huge sums of money to actually be at the table of some of these major decisions. With CCSS, that's not the case. When we were looking, in July, we started looking at CCSS. It was version 8.1. And we thought, well, it's time to really enhance the standard and bring it into the future. For example, if you look at version 8.1, it talks about private keys a lot. And it was like, well, auditing fire blocks, it's publicly known they use MPC. So how would you say CCSS supports their approach when we have requirements that state you've got to use multi-sig wallets? So at that stage, I wasn't part of the steering committee, so I had to go to the steering committee and ask for a formal opinion and say, well, can we actually look at the MPC shards or the shares and say, shall we classify those as individual private keys? And it was like, yeah, that makes sense. So we were thinking, well, and then I became a member of the steering committee, and we were thinking, well, we need to start future-proofing the standard. For example, you'll notice in version 9, there's talk of key material. So we don't talk about seed phrases at war, we try and avoid it. We don't talk about private keys and so forth. We talk about key material because the importance of a standard is that it needs to be future-proof. So you have the allowance for new technologies to come into play. Technologies don't even exist right now, right? So that's the type of thing that you have to look at when you're enhancing a standard. This is being future-proof. The other considerations when you're doing standards is obviously how inclusive is it in terms of, are you looking at the startups that have no money? Are you looking at enterprise level? I mean, and then of course also, there's cultural things that you've got to look at and expectations and so forth. So sometimes if people are wondering why is this standard, why is this wording so wishy-washy? Why don't you just get into the weeds and say, you need to use this algorithm? Well, you can't say that because right now it's like, well, the algorithm's best practice right now, but hey, in a year's time, it might be actually hacked. It's like, well, no, you can't have this. So with CCSS, we went out in July and we started a stakeholders feedback program. So we basically asked anyone in the world, can you give us some suggestions? What's your feedback on the standard? And we got inundated, we got hit with so much feedback that we were just amazed, and we just started going through it, and all the comments that were mentioned, we looked at each comment in the steering committee and we said, yeah, can we fit this in and so forth. So some of the enhancements to the standard to CCSS actually come directly from stakeholder feedback from people all around the world. One of them is, for example, isolating key material when it's when it's being used. Right, that actually came from a person who is part of a full custody service provider. They actually submitted that, and we put it in. The interesting thing here, though, is, and I think we had a discussion on this, Philip, on LinkedIn, is we put in FIPS 140 as a level 3 requirement for CCSS, right? So we were saying the key material processes must be isolated from other operating system processes or application processes, and it must be FIPS 140 or equivalent. And so we come back and we when we released V9, we said there's a 3-month review period. So again, we asked the community, have a look at V9 and see what you think about it. And so we got some feedback, and one of the feedback we got is, well, how are you going to put FIPS in when a lot of the algorithms and the curves and so forth aren't actually supported by FIPS or NIST? And we thought, wow, okay, yeah, this is making sense, because not only do we have to look at, say, an HSM or a cloud service like KMS, AWS KMS and so forth, we actually got to look at the devices that the customers are using to participate in this signing. And we were thinking, yeah, maybe FIPS, because FIPS -3 does recognize blockchain, the algorithms and the curves and so forth that blockchain uses. But still, it's a bit dicey. So right now, based on the feedback from the community, we're actually reviewing and working out whether we need to leave FIPS in there, be a bit more prescriptive, or just remove it entirely. And so this is all done transparently. E.g., I'm just talking about this on a webinar to anyone in the world. It's like, well, this is what we're going through right now, and we're asking for feedback. In some other standards, you don't get that at all. You know, it's completely closed door. You don't know what's going on. You don't know who's inputting, who's providing this guidance. You know, what's their ulterior motive? You know, is it political? Is it whatever? So yeah, that's one of the good things about CCSS.
Why do you think that is with these more legacy frameworks, that they have a more closed way they go about it?
I think there's big money in things like ISO 27001, SOC 2 and so forth. There's big money involved. You've got, you know, the top 4. You've got some pretty big players in the consultancy space that have clients that they help and recommend that you use these standards and so forth. And if their clients can't adhere to a standard because it's too prescriptive or so forth, then these big players have big money and then can go and provide suggestions to the certification bodies and the standard makers around these things. And this is where you get into a thing where you're actually working out, you're doing standards based on how much the stakeholders are actually paying for a voice in your ear. That's my personal opinion. You know, there's some really good work coming out of some of these standards like ISO 27001 and the work with TC 307 and so forth. And it's a lot more transparent with ISO because you have countries around the world that actually participate in these standards. But some of the more closed door ones that don't come out of international standards but come out of the bodies, you know, like a bunch of exchanges get together and say that we're going to do a security standard. You know, that's the type of thing where the more closed door influence type situations can manifest. So it's, and CCSS is never trying to do that. It's completely open and transparent, and we're going to stay like that because we believe that if the community writes the standard, then it's going to be a good standard.
Right. Mark, you had mentioned you were doing a little bit of work on stable coins. I'm going to put you in the hot seat for a second. Do you think Tether has the money?
Can't say that. No comment. Yeah, the work I'm doing on I can't say that because I'm not, you know, my expertise is in security and so forth. But the stable coin is another interesting thing, right? So I'm participating in the model law for the Commonwealth for stablecoin regulation. Very exciting. I think in the working group there's 34 experts from around the world that are contributing to this model law for the Commonwealth. So it's all the countries in the Commonwealth, right? New Zealand's part of the Commonwealth. And so I'm in the cybersecurity section of it. So I help contribute to the standards, the requirements around in that space. And yeah, it's just fascinating, some of these experts when they talk about, you know, some of the requirements for stable coins and so forth. The interesting thing on my side, which is where I fully understand it, is things like, for example, blockchain state monitoring. So I think it was the Bybit hack. Ciphers, they're a vendor that provide monitoring software. They have a free channel on X where they alert to suspicious activity on blockchains that they monitor, that they know are owned by exchanges and so forth. And so they monitor for suspicious activity. And, I was looking at these alerts and I was going, wow, this is amazing. In some cases, they were alerting the platform that, something's not right, even before the platform knew what the hell was going on themselves.
Right.
And we thought, wow, this is really quite an interesting detective control. And it seems to be very effective. And so we got together in the steering committee and we created a requirement basically in V9 that says you've got to implement blockchain state monitoring, confirmed and unconfirmed. And again, this is another thing where we're completely transparent with this, is the idea of unconfirmed monitoring, right? Like monitoring a mempool. Right. Well, in some architectures, they don't have a mempool. So how are you going to meet the unconfirmed state? So currently, right now, we're talking with some of the CCSAs around, well, we need to provide guidance here because in some situations, the unconfirmed state can't be monitored, right? Because it's just not there. And so in CCSS, we did that. But now in the model law for stablecoins, we're actually bringing that requirement over and we're introducing it into the stablecoin model law as a security requirement. So you can see how some of these ideas come up and then they transcend over to different standards.
And it's really interesting to think about, like, even with that one, monitoring blockchain state. I mean, because you can have like a private mempool, right? And so then how does that factor into, some of these? Well, obviously, if it's a private mempool, you're not going to be able to monitor it, right? So it's like it's pretty much out of the question. But there's like these weird little nuances that like may not exactly fit into some of these, into some of this wording, and that's like how do you think about like that kind of thing, like that we can use that as an example, like private mempool. I mean, there could be like some material stuff in the private mempool, right? Like, how do you think about something like this?
Well, the thing there is if it's a private mempool and the entity that owns that private mempool is going under CCSS audit, then obviously that control applies to them, right? Because they have access to the private mempool. The other key thing here is again, it's the way you word the requirement. So you notice there, we could have said monitor blockchains, right, for the other transactions that you have, but it's not future-proofing that particular requirement. So that's where you come up with the wording is saying you got to monitor blockchain state, unconfirmed and confirmed. So that future-proofs it somewhat. The thing there, though, is when you get up to the more vague descriptions or the intent of the requirement is that for future proofing is that ultimately you're going to provide guidance. So the very question that you just posed to me will be like an FAQ or some type of response that comes from the CCSS steering committee, which comes and that response probably is formulated from feedback that we're getting from people like you. Is that, okay, this is a really important question, we need to address it. So right now, in the background, so CCSS has the steering committee, so we basically maintain the standard and the direction of the standard. But then there's the advocacy group. And these are a bunch of auditors, CCSS auditors, that want to help improve the standard as well, and they provide feedback from, from the trenches. Like they're deep in here and they're doing the audits, right? And they're applying the requirements to these entities. And so we meet every week and the auditors talk about, their experiences and so forth. And then because I'm in both camps, I form that discussion and I present it to the next steering committee meeting, right? So there's a direct path. And one of the things is as Philip rightly mentioned, this whole question of how do you actually interpret this? And so right now we're actually working out what guidance material we need to provide. to help guide the auditor and the entity in terms of actually understanding, well, how does this vagueness apply directly to my environment? And that's where we're focusing on next, right, is providing more guidance, because you can't be too prescriptive in a standard requirement, because then it locks it in, right? It locks it into that particular date, and if something new comes along, you've got to update the standard. And updating a standard is no small feat. Like, for example, with CCSS, we were going to just go and release version 8.2 in July, right? We're just going to enhance some stuff. But the feedback, we just got hammered with feedback. And it took us until December of 2024 to actually say, right, we've done over 1,000 individual changes to the standard, over 1,000. And we said, okay. And there was still more feedback to do. And we just drew a line in the sand and said, okay, let's release this now and continue on with analysing the feedback. So we released it as V9 and just got it out there, because there's some of the enhancements was really, really good, and we believe it will really help provide assurance. So yeah, it's an ongoing activity, but it can be very intensive and very costly to update a standard. Normally standards, sometimes they update every 2 to 3 years. And again, this is why you need to be vague, because imagine, in 2 years' time, how different this Web3 space is going to be, and how different it is going to impact a standard. Like, you could basically make a standard obsolete if you become too prescriptive.
Yeah, and I mean, and just to keep, I mean, it's challenging what you have to do on the steering committee, but there's that challenge where in the CCSS you need a peer review process, right? And so then it's like, what if those peer reviewers have different opinions on how these should be interpreted, and so but then those guidelines really come in handy in that case, right? 'Cause then, yeah.
It's very unique, the peer review process for CCSS. So normally with the other standards, the peer review process is done internally. So it's in the same organisation as the person that conducted the audit. CCSS didn't want to do that approach. They were thinking more along the lines of getting someone completely independent to actually review the redacted report. The key thing here, the situation that we got to reflect on is, well, if you get an external auditor to review a report on compliance, there's highly confidential information on an auditor's report, and it should only be shared between the auditor who conducted the audit and the entity that was audited. So how do we get across that we want a third party, completely independent auditor to review the auditor's work? Peer review. So we came up with this notion, well, the fact is the peer review is not going to have an NDA with the organisation that got, the entity that got audited. It's another cost factor. If you get another auditor to review all the evidence, then basically you're doing the audit again. So we came up with this idea that the peer review auditor, receives a redacted version of the report on compliance, the auditor's report. And they don't have access to any of the evidence. They only look at the effort that the auditor took to reach their opinion. So in a CCSS report, it's actually very detailed. Most reports will come out, auditors' reports will come out at least 150 pages, sometimes going up to 200 pages, because of the level of detail required, because it comes from PCI DSS, where the auditor's got to do a lot of work to gain assurance that this requirement's met. So the peer reviewer, what they do is they look at the redacted ROC. So in the redacted ROC, all sensitive information is removed. And there's a process for doing that we recommend. And so what the peer reviewer is looking at is how much effort did the auditor put in to form an opinion, and what types of evidence did they look at? Did they observe a process? Did they interview the right roles, the right personnel? Did they review policy standards and procedures and so forth? So this is coming to a stage now where you're actually just saying, did the auditor do a good job? And did they do a good job enough to reach an opinion? And it's proven to be quite successful. The first report that an auditor does has to go to the steering committee, and we peer review it. So we make sure that the auditor is doing enough rigor, because we know the standard, right? So we can say, well, are you really doing this correctly? And plus, being an auditor myself, I can work out whether they are actually doing proper evidence gathering techniques and so forth, right, based on the methodology. So the first audit report always goes to the steering committee and it gets done over with a fine-tooth comb. Then once they pass that, and if there's any remediation, they do that, then it goes out to the general auditors population, where basically another auditor can do the peer review. But there's strict guidelines in terms of what you do.
Yeah, that makes sense. And switching gears just a little bit, you mentioned, like regulators and how brutal that can be when regulators finally come in. How do you think about like regulators, the CCSS, and well, I guess like one question just to step back is kind of a feeling that I've had for a while, and it seems like this is changing, but for a while it's like regulators largely have kind of been behind the ball in our, well, I guess everybody knows this, right? Been behind the ball in our industry. Maybe that's changing, but do you think that, like, just given the complexity of this asset class and the technology that's involved, is regulation going to be a place that we're going to be able to kind of like look to for reasonable guidelines?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I talk to regulators, and sometimes I do a presentation on the importance of standards when looking at model law and regulation and so forth. So standards like information security standards that we're talking about, they provide really good guidance and best practice in the industry. So the regulators are very much aware of these importance of standards and applying best practices and so forth. In terms of like with CCSS, well, the assurance that it can provide the regulators is the entity conducting good key management practices. Regulators generally don't assert or make a standard certification mandatory. For example, you won't really see regulators come out and say, you've got to be ISO 27001 certified, right? Or you've got to do a SOC 2 Type 2. Regulators can't do that, because what happens if the standard also suddenly becomes in disrepute, or that there's no ability to vet auditors, and you'll find that certain companies are actually, if you pay them enough, they'll just sign off on anything you do, right? So that makes the whole certification reporting process obsolete, because no one trusts some companies that produce these things. So the regulators it's always, and it's not just Web3, right? There's a fine balance between how prescriptive you go versus the country's desire to embrace this new technology, because they might want to become one of the Web3 go-to places in the world, right? So they don't want to be too prescriptive where they actually scare people off, and the platforms go somewhere else where the jurisdictions are a little bit more accommodating. More accommodating, I should say. So yeah, I think regulators are starting to do a good job. I've seen some of the stuff that's coming out, like Hong Kong, Singapore, UAE, and that they're really getting into it, and they understand this technology. There's a lot of experts that help them and assist them in understanding this technology, this new Web3 environment. And it is a fine balance. But basically, to answer your question, what I've seen coming out now is really good. But again, just like I mentioned with standards, right, you can't be too prescriptive, because there could be platforms that are coming into a jurisdiction that are doing something that's never been done before. And the regulators, because they're under official processes and so forth, they just can't pivot as fast as what you would expect, right? Because obviously the law's got to be changed, then the law's got to be interpreted and put into regulations and so forth. So it's very time consuming to actually introduce more requirements to fit into something that never existed when the requirement first came out, or the regulation first came out. So I think they're doing a good job. Generally, on the whole, I think they're doing a good job, and they're increasing their rigor, especially around security.
Yeah, and but I mean, like that regulatory arbitrage that you mentioned, that's an interesting point. I mean, we saw that in the U.S., right? Like so many folks left the U.S. I mean, the problem wasn't really like, I guess the problem was different now. You know that I'm saying this out loud. The problem was that there was really no regulatory guideline at all. It wasn't that the regulations were too strict. It was just that there was no guidance at all. Um, well, so what do you think is the biggest threat in our industry at the moment, from just like a dollar loss perspective, sitting in the security seat that you're in?
Oh, it's again, it comes back to the fact is that this sector is based on money, finance, right? So it's critical. You got platforms that start up out of nowhere and people pour millions of dollars into it, as I've mentioned quite a few times now. The thing that we really need to look at is taking security a little bit more seriously, because of the factors that, you've got state actors looking into this now. For example, with PCI DSS, it's made such a massive positive contribution to shoring up some of the vulnerabilities that were in like retail, the laxed attitude towards security. With PCI, because it's so rigorous, and there's a big stick, right? So if you're a big, like a retail organization, and you're not PCI compliant, then these card schemes and the PCI Council can come down on you and say, well, the card schemes can say, right, we'll just turn off processing. You can't accept credit cards anymore because you're not PCI DSS compliant. I mean, that's a pretty big stick. And that's where, PCI DSS has really cleaned up the industry for credit card fraud and so forth. And so the criminals, state actors, criminals, script kiddies, what have you, they're finding it a tough time to actually get a reasonable amount of credit cards out versus the effort. So the effort involved in actually breaching a system that's PCI DSS compliant and extracting out a ton of credit card information that actually makes the whole effort worthwhile is very limited now. So that's why they're going over to the Web3 space, right? You've got state actors like Lazarus Group and so forth. They're having a ball over in Web3 because, you've got one platform that's got maybe $100 million worth of crypto on their platform. There's a bunch of guys that said, hey, let's just do this because we see a vision and so forth. And they don't even look at security, or they give it a token gesture like, yeah, we do a smart contract. We got it audited a year ago and it's never been audited since. And like the state actors and the criminals are going, wow, this is just fantastic. We'll just run a tool over the smart contract code and have a bit of a play with it, and we get $100 million. It's just, so this is why you've got massive focus of criminals and state actors over in the Web3 space, is because the security posture and information security is so immature right now. And the effort for a state actor to hack someone like Bybit is so worth it when you can get $1.4 billion out of your effort. And the fact is that, unofficially, it was something so simple as, the developer got phished.
Right.
It's, at the Safe Wallet, some of these reports coming out state that the developer got phished, and the criminal or the state actor basically got inside the developer's computer and pivoted, worked out that the developer had access somehow to an S3 bucket that had a JS file, JavaScript file that their customers used to sign transactions. I mean, literally, this is what happens in the Web2 space. Not enough security awareness training, not ongoing security awareness training, not testing for phishing, poor access control management. A dev, theoretically, and it's a bit hard to implement in Web3 space, but over in the Web2 space, the legacy space, a developer should not be deploying their code to production, full stop. Right? That's in baseline security standards. If the developer needs to deploy to production, they actually use a completely different user account that has those privileges, and they do it while they're being monitored by someone else to make sure they're not doing anything fishy, right? And then, of course, you've got all the other controls behind it, like peer review process and all that stuff, right? But in the Web3 space, it's non-existent.
Right.
So,
And it's people don't realize a lot of times that through that exploit, everyone that was using the safe could have been. I mean, the only reason that it was only Bybit is because they were waiting for the big fish to swim along before they threw out their net. It was everybody was vulnerable. It was just that the exploit was specific towards waiting for those big transactions. But at that point in time, anyone that was using safe could have been exploited.
yeah. I mean, they knew exactly right. They put it in the code. Unofficially, it's stated they put it in the code that saying, hey, if these certain wallet addresses come up, then we execute. It's like, it's not just safe too. Like on Bybit's side, you could have thought, well, okay, why are we storing $1.4 billion, crypto funds in one wallet?
Or in one transaction, why are you moving it?
Yeah. Why are you doing that? Where's your risk management to say, actually, maybe we should use a few more wallets and split these funds up, right? And then the other question is why are you using a wallet with a smart contract as a cold wallet? Well, it's not a cold wallet because it's online. Why are you doing that? These are the fundamental risk management questions you'd be saying is under a risk assessment. Why, like smart contracts are one of the main attack vectors. Like if you go to Web3 is going great, the website that Molly White maintains, fascinating source of information about hacks. Also Rect, right? That's the other awesome site that tracks all these hacks. And if you do, like we did an analysis on Web3 is going great. We looked at all the hacks that have been done in the last 2 years. And we said, what is the main attack vector? What is the main vulnerability? And by far, it was smart contracts. By far, the biggest cause of massive amounts of money and so forth. And you say to yourself, well, okay, well, smart contracts are a risk. That's quite high up in the risk thing. Okay, so we're using a wallet to store $1.4 billion worth of funds, and it's got a smart contract. And even even riskier, it's owned by a third party. Right? So we're relying on a service provider to ensure that they have secure coding techniques for their smart contract. They're practicing secure deployment. They've got separation of duties, least privilege principles and so forth. Right? We're trusting them that they're doing all this good stuff. And how are we trusting them? Well, maybe we do some due diligence when we first bring them on board. But the thing is like in a decent risk assessment, these things would have been highlighted. If you got a wallet that's run by smart contracts and you put 1.4 billion in it, is that a risk? So these are the things that we really need to look at in this space. Is actually not thinking you're different than the legacy world. You're not different at all.
Right.
You got the same problems as a bank. You got the same problems as a retail. It fundamentally comes down to ensuring, the real basics. Training your staff on secure, security awareness training. What a phishing email looks like. Putting in controls where a lot of the phishing emails is detected and never reaches the users even before they see it. Right. Patch management. Risk management. For example, patch management, it's still important in Web3 space because if your wallet software is running on a Linux server that hasn't been patched for 5 years and can be accessed via the internet, then there's a pretty good chance that Linux server is going to be hacked. And if you get if you get pseudo rights on a Linux server, no matter how fortified a wallet is, it's game over because the hacker can just delete the wallet and replace it with a malicious one or change something, right? So patch management is essential in Web3 as well, just for that. So yeah, there's nothing different in Web3 space. It's just the same vulnerabilities coming through.
Right. Well, Phil, I know that Mark brought up Rect, and then you had been doing some analysis on like the Rect database and some of your findings around specifically like private key key material handling, I guess. And Mark, I know you mentioned that smart contracts were the biggest exploit vector. I'm curious how that's defined when a smart contract is the issue, or it's the culprit. When you say like the smart contract is to blame, is that the logic itself? Is it how it's interacted with?
It,
How
it comes down to, I mean, just look at the system development lifecycle, right? For a start, the developers of the smart contract should be trained in secure coding techniques for a start. So, the overall smart contracts is bad comes down to, that's an opinion, but the thing is that it starts at the grassroots. For a start, the developers need to be trained in secure coding techniques. Any libraries that you use in the smart contract or any third-party code that you use in your own smart contract should be vetted and should be monitored to make sure that, for example, like with Safe, the JavaScript file that is absolutely fundamental to signing a transaction is the same JS file that you used last time, right? So simple things, generate a hash, the JS
Exum
file,
or something, yeah.
compare it. If it looks different, watch out.
Right.
And then you've got the entire system. So developers code securely. There's a peer review process that makes sure that someone external to the development of the smart contract does a thorough peer review. You use automated tooling, of course, but automated tooling only goes to a certain extent. You still need humans to look at the code, fundamentally. You just can't rely on automated tooling spitting out stuff because sometimes it's not that great. And what happens if you use a tool that's really cheap and really nasty? And then there's deployment. How are you going to deploy? Is there any kill switches that you can turn off the smart contract, a kill switch, something like that? Are you monitoring the smart contract code to make sure it hasn't been replaced? And it goes right through. So when I talk about smart contracts are the main weakness, well, fundamentally, there's no proper, what we would call system development lifecycle management and ongoing management of the smart contract.
Right. Yeah, we've seen a few on the smart contract auditor side, especially a couple of years ago. It seemed like their entire suite was these automated tooling solutions, but you're really only getting or protecting yourself from the real JV actors, because the big bad malicious guys, they've got access to the same automated tooling you do. I mean, you're not protecting yourself from them. You're just kind of clearing out some of their options, and so they can be a little bit more focused on their attacks, and they're able to, they're running the same tools to see how to break you that you're running to protect you, and so it's
yeah.
Like you said,
there's different levels of tooling quality. So you may use the cheapest and nastiest because you can't afford anything more.
right.
And you don't have a human involved in the peer review process or looking at it. So, where does that leave you in terms of actually, are you effectively doing the job enough?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great place to end it there, Mark. Really appreciate you making the time. Unless, Dalton, do you have any closing questions?
Actually,
yeah, go for it.
More of a question on. So I'm every day getting closer and closer to the idea that the only thing we're going to get out of crypto is that stable coins are going to be a better way to move money around, and that everything else, like the DeFi, the 300% yields that you were talking about before, that's just kind of a musical chairs game and a distraction and speculation that's kind of helped us get to a place where maybe we have more sophisticated stablecoin rails, and then maybe some tokenization of, so just slight improvements. I say slight, maybe they're significant, to existing infrastructure. The same way like credit cards were a huge improvement over cash transactions for a lot of reasons. But other than that, I think that I'm still hard pressed to find, specifically in DeFi, solutions that have provided true value. Like when you talk about Uniswap, and this is something that Phil and I talk about internally all the time as well, is like Uniswap is cool. They've done some really cool stuff, but at the end of the day, you're trading nonsense for nonsense. Like there's not a lot of true value from moving this coin to this coin, because it's just, like I said, this is a hot potato game when you're trying to speculate on these things. But as far as like true value being created, it's stable coins in it, but it's stable coins if we have the controls in place like that you're working on to make them safe and secure. And if you have to put too many controls to where we're actually slowing these things down, we've got larger block sizes so that the mempool can stay out longer and you can check these transactions. Like, okay, well, if you stretch that out too long for transactions, like you've got the same system as now, but maybe a little bit less paperwork. So I'm just curious, outside of security, which obviously is critical to how we move forward in the space, what is your kind of vision for how crypto moves forward? Like, what matters, what doesn't matter, what's the signal, what's the noise?
Well, I mean, with ISO TC 307, so that's the technical committee in ISO that's creating standards for blockchain and DLT, there's some really amazing use cases that the ISO technical committee are looking at around the world for how blockchain can actually improve a process. And so I think there's a future for blockchain, definitely.
Right.
And you know, again, the use cases that are coming out here where they actually they look at the use case and then they say, well, okay, well, we've got to have the standard reflect that. It's not just security. It's
Right.
like, well, how do you track a solar panel that's been installed on a roof in America that needs to be reused and doesn't end up in landfill? How
Right.
can you track that solar panel to an emerging country that wants to actually use it because it's still good?
Right.
And the blockchain can provide that type of infrastructure that actually makes it really easy to do that.
Mm-hmm.
The whole crypto space, which is I think you're alluding to, is finance.
Mm-hmm.
In the stablecoin world, there's this thing about, you know, a large percentage of the population of the world don't have banking services.
Right.
And stablecoins, the idea of stablecoins, I think, is to actually get away from those institutions where you pay a lot to transfer money and there's forex and all types of stuff, right? And stablecoins is the vision for them that I see is that it's going to help a lot of the people around the world that can't afford banking services because you know they can't do AML because they don't have any ID,
Right.
right? And you got it's hard when you come from the Western world to think of situations where you can't get a bank account
Right.
because you don't have ID
Mm-hmm.
or you don't have a mobile phone. You know, it's hard. And I've been really privileged to deal with this working group where there's, you know, like 34 experts around the world, and they're seeing these types of issues with the current banking system, the financial system in countries, you know, Africa and so forth, and you actually can hear what they're talking about, how hard it is. And then you think, yeah, I can see the vision for stablecoins and I can see where it's really, really going. In
Right.
terms of the other DeFi initiatives and all that type of stuff, who knows? You know,
Right.
you throw something, you know, you throw as much stuff to the wall and see what sticks, I guess.
Okay.
But
I'm glad people are experimenting. That's for sure. I
Yeah, I
haven't
mean-
seen one that's really convincing yet.
yeah, I mean, innovation's good, right? I mean, printing press, you know, it's just a natural evolution of what humans are doing. But I do, for myself, I do see the benefits of stable coins. Again, you got the balance of, you know, when the big players come in, whoever they are, government, whatever, or just big organizations involved in this, is how far do they go into it, how far they try and control it and so forth. Then,
Right.
you know, you've got the concerns about, well, what is actually backing this? You know, is it algorithmic?
Right.
Is it just one currency? Like for America, is it just US? Right? So, you know, is America looking at becoming the number one stablecoin in the world because they're the number one fiat currency in the world, right? So again, it's very interesting to be part of this and to actually see what happens. But you definitely, I do see a vision for stablecoins.
Appreciate it. I feel that was it for me. If you want to close this out.
Awesome. Yeah, let's close it out. Mark, once again, thanks for joining us. And if you could stick around for just 1 minute as we stop the recording here.